Welcome to the whirlpool of the unsolved, where the unsolved is questioned and dissected. I'm Frank, and today's episode we will be talking about the Sims family murders. A slaying that happened in an unexpected neighborhood, in a time no one feared to lock their doors. A family of 5 losing 3 members in a gruesome manner, at home doing their nightly routines. No break-ins accounted for or forced entry, but someone entered, taking the lives of 3. 2 of them were bound and blindfolded, shot in the head. The third, a young girl still in her nightgown, shot in the head and stabbed multiple times in the abdomen. A terrifying image that scarred those who witnessed this gruesome scene. A cold case still unsolved. Questions with answers that could lead to an arrest, but legally unable to. Murder weapons yet to be found to lead to a possible suspect, or possibly bring a suspect behind bars. A case that is still mourned to this day by those who witnessed this tragedy, that had experienced that fatal day and knew the victims personally. So let's go ahead and talk about the location of this horrifying incident. This terrible case that we'll be talking about today happened in the capital of Florida. And if you don't know what's the capital of Florida, it's Tallahassee. And this happened in a time that the town was starting to grow to what we know it as today. So this was still in the process of being built to almost a metropolitan area. At that time, it was still a quiet town when people didn't fear to lock their doors, which you would understand. Anybody that lives in the suburbs or in a really good neighborhood understands that the community is very tight-knit and there's really no fear in the community to actually feel like they have to lock their doors. And this was a time when kids could stay out and not worry about anything bad happening. So that makes this case an unexpected happening, as well, clearly, as a very tragic one in general. And like I said, when you're from, I'm not from a suburban area, but I had my sister that lived in a suburban area, and I can tell you this for a fact. It's so quiet that you don't feel it as a necessity to lock your doors. So for this particular time, for them to feel that way and then something like this to occur, it must have been a big shock and nonetheless a tragedy. And like I said, during this time, the kids were able to run around till probably the sun came up. And I was reading up on the location and how it was during that time. And no lie to you, it's really, it seemed like a tight-knit community. Everybody knew everybody, but nobody bothered anybody type stuff. And it was the reason being for them not having to lock their doors. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on, because clearly, as you've seen in the summary, there was no forced entry or anything like that. So that kind of leads us to thinking that somebody just probably walked in. So let's talk about our victims here. The people that passed away, that were the victims to this terrible and tragic moment. The victims who lost their lives, sadly, were Robert W. Sims. He was 42 years old and a nationally recognized educational computer expert. So he was really, really known in the state of Florida, in the states in general. From what I was reading, he was a computer expert during a time where computers were just starting to kind of, kick into high gear. This happened around the 1960s. So you can only imagine that he was recognized as one of those people that knew about computers in a time that computers were really becoming a thing for people. Then we have Helen Sims, which was his wife. She was 34 at the time. And Joy Sims, which sadly was the youngest of them all. She was only 12 years old. There were they were a family of five. Clearly, like I said earlier, having another two daughters that weren't at the location during that tragic moment. You have Norma Jeanette, which is 17. She was 17 at the time. And Judith Ann, which was 15 as well. The ages are a little confusing a little bit because from what I was reading, one says that they were 16 and 15 and so on and so forth. But this is like the one that I've seen consistently. They weren't at the house because they were babysitting that night. Jeanette, the oldest of the two, was the one who actually discovered that horrendous scene. So let's go into exactly what happened. What happened in this case, how it all played out in that case, and it's sad nonetheless. When you see a family murdered like this, it's really tough. Like these cases, they're intriguing, but nonetheless they're very sad and tragic. And this one, because there is a child, it hits me a little bit more being a father. So let's go ahead and get into this. This horrible tragedy occurred. If you didn't know, it happened on Saturday, October 22nd of 1966. So, like I said, the father was a computer expert. He was recognized nationally. And like I said, it's during a period in time where computers were starting to become a thing. Most likely during the Florida State, Mississippi State game that night. So, I was reading into it, and that day it was Florida State versus Mississippi State. If I'm not mistaken, it was a college game, a football game. A lot of people were there, and police and a lot of people believe that it happened during that game. The two oldest daughters of the Sims, which was, I believe, Jeanette and Judith, they were out babysitting that night. Clearly, you have a whole bunch of people going out to see that game. So clearly, there were people that needed babysitters, and they were babysitters and did that for extra cash and so on. So they were babysitting that night. What exactly happened isn't really known, but robbery was clearly ruled out immediately. There was no forced entry, as well as nothing out of place or even missing. This is why they ruled out robbery, because when they checked the scene, there was nothing out of place. There was nothing missing. There was everything was basically where it should have been. When Jeanette, the oldest of the daughters, got home, she saw that the TV was on, but nobody was gathered around in the living room, which is something she expected. It was late at night. Came in, TV was on. You would expect that the TV would have been on, clearly, because, their daughter was going to come home, and probably they didn't want the house to be dark when she got home, knowing that she probably would have been home late anyways. She then walked around the house to try and find her parents and little sister. So clearly she's trying to make sure that everybody is home and probably in bed, just to let them know that, hey, I'm here. When she entered her parents' room, she saw her parents and Joy's body. So this is where she discovered the bodies of her family member. Her parents were still alive, but unconscious when she found them. But Joy was dead when her body was found. She was completely dead, which is very, very sad. Jeanette found her father lying on top of the flowered bedspread, bound, blindfolded, and shot once in the head. On the carpet, she found her mother, who was also bound and blindfolded. She was shot in the head twice and on her leg once. Diagonal to her mother was her little sister, Joy. She was still in her nightgown. She was shot in the head once and stabbed 6 through 7 times in the abdomen. The reason why I said 6 to 7 times, it's because there was articles that said 6 and then some that said 7. So I know it's in that area, and I actually read the original articles. You can actually find them online. So that's why I decided to put 6 to 7. Some say 6 times, some say 7. The first on the scene was Bevis funeral home owner, Russell Bevis, and his then 16-year-old son, Rocky Bevis. Upon arriving, Russell demanded his son to find him something to unbind them and try to save their lives. Helen was transported immediately to the hospital where she lost her life 9 days after the incident. So the mother was the one that actually held on and clinged on to life longer than the father. Apparently, once they arrived, the father had died. One of the first investigators that got there was Larry Campbell, who was 24 years old at the time and became the lead detective from Leon County Sheriff Department on the case. So he was extremely, extremely young. And I just want to talk about this just a little bit because this is really, really crazy. Okay. So daughter finds the bodies. Father shot in the head once, mother shot in the head twice, and once in the leg. That tells me, well, me personally, I have an opinion of the fact that she probably tried to run, and that's why she was found on the floor. And she was shot in the leg once and then twice in the head. The daughter, sadly, she was stabbed. And one thing that I know that I've read into when it comes to stabbing, it's a hate, it's a lust. There's some sort of emotion that goes into stabbing somebody. It takes a lot for somebody to stab somebody. And the fact that the only one that was stabbed was this little girl, it's very sad and brings up a lot of questions. And it brings a lot of questions up when it comes later on into this episode, because we talk about suspects and we talk about things like that and certain rumors and things like that. But it amazes me how whoever did this horrendous crime, they just shot and killed the parents, but decided to stab this little girl. That is another level of evil. Like, honestly, evil, because to stab somebody, it takes a lot. And like I said, you can read up on people that stab people. A lot of it is like hate. A lot of it has to do with love, lust, whatever the case may be. And it just puts you in a different direction when you look into this case and the fact that mom and dad were shot. But this little girl, not only was she shot, but she was stabbed. And now it brings me to wonder, was she stabbed before she was shot? Because if she was stabbed before she was shot, she was tortured. She must have been in excruciating pain and then put out of her misery. Or this person was just evil enough to shoot the child and then stab the child just to get the feel of how stabbing felt. I don't know. I don't know who did this. Clearly, we don't know because it's still an unsolved case to this day. But whoever did this was evil. They were the definition of evil to do something like this in general. The fact that the first people to actually show up was the funeral home owner, Russell Bevis, and his 16-year-old son, puts me in a perspective of why were they the first one. I did read some stuff about the first number that she called, that I believe wasn't even the police department or anything like that, the sheriff county department. But the point is, why would they come and unbind them for any reason? Like, that is the job of the ambulance and things like that. I understand the fact that they were trying to save this family, but as well as you're touching things and making it hard for evidence, like to obtain evidence. Once you start touching things, it makes it hard to kind of go into a deep investigation and making sure that nothing is unblemished, because at that point you blemished everything. And then you have Larry Campbell, who is a 24-year-old at that time, who became the lead investigator of this case. don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against young people in general. I think just having a young person, a fresh face, a fresh mind is a good thing. But sometimes when you're young, you're set in your ways and you're set on your thoughts, and it can be a big issue. See, a person that is older, that has experience, may have different opinions and may go into different directions and try to pull on things a little bit more when it comes to a case like this to try to figure out who exactly did this horrendous crime. I'm not at all happy of the fact that reading into this detective was 24 years old. But hey, it is what it is. That's what happened. And clearly it's a smaller town, well, this section. So it's understandable that they probably didn't have anybody with a lot of experience there, or this was just a new face and somebody that came from somewhere where it was more notorious, or, would have expected highly of this person. I don't know exactly, but you'll see why I'm not so happy about this case in general. So that's what happened in this case, and how this family seen this most tragic day. Now, let's go into this investigation that I'm so happy to get into. That's sarcasm nonetheless. The investigation, in my opinion, was almost botched. If anything, botched. I think it was botched. And I'm noticing a lot when I'm doing these cases, these unsolved cases, a lot of them are botched. There's a lot of departments that aren't doing their jobs correctly, aren't doing what they need to do. And this is clearly one of them. Now, they had a few people as suspects, but never made an arrest. So they had a few people as suspects, but not once had made an arrest. There was no gun found. The gun that was used to kill them, I think it was a 32. It was a 32 millimeter bullet that was shot from a gun. So clearly a 32 millimeter handgun was used, and they never found it, or the knife that was used on Joy. They believed that the knife that was used on Joy, they believed it was a double-edged one based off of the stab wounds that were found on Joy's body. They tried looking in a pond, I believe, that was located near the Sims home, but nothing was ever found there. When it comes to the suspects, from all my research and watching, I even watched the documentary. The documentary is a really good documentary. You can find it on the website, or you can just search it on Google. It was a very long documentary, about 2 hours long. I've watched it twice. From the looks of it, there weren't many suspects in general. A lot of them were also based on hearsay. So there wasn't many suspects that they can actually pinpoint on. C.A. Roberts was the local pastor of the church in that town. He was considered a suspect at one point. They believed that he and Mr. Sims had a clash of head once. Other reasons due to rumors was that he was most likely having an affair with Mr. Sims' wife, Helen, Mrs. Sims. Now, this is one of those things where a lot of these suspects were based off of rumors. And like I said, I was watching the documentary, read up on a lot of this. Apparently, there was a time that C.A. Roberts, he was actually at the game. So there was video of him at the game, the Florida State and the Mississippi State game. And he disappeared, I think, for a short period of time. He came back with apparently new clothing, whatever it was that they said. But they did an estimated time that it would have taken him to go to their house, to the Sims house, commit that that crime and come back and make a change. And they said they believe that it would have been impossible to do something like that. And a lot of people claim that they seen him the whole entire time at that game. So there was no solid proof that even happened, that it was him. As well as other rumors that he may have had someone else do it because they believed that he had a strong cult following, because the pastor was really known to be good with his words and people loved him. So they believe that he may have had a cult following, that he had somebody actually commit these murders for him. That was another rumor, but that was kind of tossed out the window as well, just because they didn't feel like that would have been possible, even though he had a cult following. From what I was reading, from what I was seeing, he was a very charismatic man, and a lot of people loved him. But the fact that it was based off of hearsay and just a rumor nonetheless, there was no proof of him having an affair with Mr. Sims' wife, Helen. It kind of puts you at a dead end at some point. Now we have Robert David Howells, who was Peggy Howells' husband. He would threaten Peggy about doing what he did to the Sims. At one point, he threatened her to kill her. He explained how. So this is what happened. This guy threatened his wife. He was abusive. He was a drunk. He was abusive. He admitted to his wife that he had killed the Sims. And he threatened her that he would do to her what he did to the Sims. Not only did he do that, but he explained how he did it and who he killed in order, being Joy first, the child, the mother, and then the father. His wife at this time was willing to wear a wire. So she went to the police after hearing this. And this is really crazy. Like, this is really, really wild. So she admits to being threatened by her husband about him killing the Sims and him doing what he did to them, to her. Now, she goes and tells the police this. The police is like, well, how can we actually take this serious? Because clearly she admitted to being abused, and they believe that it may have been a way for Peggy to have him arrested and out of her life. Now, during this period, Peggy, his wife, she was willing to wear a wire to capture his confession. So she was like, listen, if you don't believe me, put a wire on me. I'll get him to confess. This was a plan that was made with Peggy willing to do this because she wanted this man arrested, and she felt like he was being very, very honest. Now, this is where things get a little wild. So Hal's daughter knew about this, knew about what was about to happen. And she went ahead and told her father what Peggy was up to. So Robert, knowing this, he never confessed on audio to it. So we have a situation where somebody confessed to this, to this horrendous massacre of a family, So we have somebody that confessed to it. His wife is willing to record this, to record the confession of this. Now, how crazy is it that his daughter finds out about it and goes to him and lets him know, hey, she has a wire on. She's working with the police. Don't say anything. That makes me wonder if he actually did it. And would his daughter be, is she part of this? Because she gave a heads up to her father not to say anything. The police didn't do anything about it because he didn't confess, which kind of upsets me because at this point, you have somebody that possibly confessed to his wife of doing something like this, and nothing was actually done. That's sad. Now we have another suspect. And to be honest with you, this is probably going to be a 2-part episode due to the fact that we're kind of going into the 30-minute mark, possibly. But nonetheless, we got to keep going. Another suspect, Tommy Fulgham. This is a whole entire thing. Like, a matter of fact, we're just going to cut it here. Because Tommy Fulgham, and I have much to say about this, and this case is really one of those cases where I kind of really got into it and really researched and dug deep. But Tommy Fulgham is an interesting suspect, as well as his wife at the time. So we'll talk about that in a second part to this episode. So if you enjoyed this episode, honestly, listen to part 2, because part 2 is going to get into Tommy Fulgham and his wife. And, no, not Tommy Fulgham. Actually, we have 2 more. We have Tommy Fulgham, and the one that I'm actually meaning to talk about is Charles Fox and his wife. Charles Fox and his wife is very interesting. Tommy Fulgham is interesting, and you'll see why. And I would definitely not miss it because it's very intriguing. But this has more, a lot more. So tune in to the second part. I probably release it this same week. So if I release this on Wednesday, I probably release the second part on Thursday. If not, just hold on to the following week to get to the second part. I promise you it's going to be really good and worth listening into. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Whirlpool of the Unsolved. Check in this Thursday or next week for part 2 of this episode, and make sure that you like the podcast and follow the social media pages. Instagram at Whirlpool of the Unsolved Podcast, Twitter at WO Unsolved Pod, and the Facebook page. Till next time.